everyone! From dramas to webtoons to novels, explore Korea's story with us. This is Who Reads Story. My name is An Sung-jin and I'm a reporter, and here with us we have Andrea. Hello, Andrea.
Hi, everybody. Hi. So my name is Andrea. I'm from Colombia and I'm studying my master here right now.
Great to have you again, Andrea. And today we're going to be talking about something special. We're going to be talking about Korean poetry for our readers and our viewers today. And today I had some thinking on who or which poet I should be introducing. And today I decided to bring someone who's called the idol among the poets, among our younger readers. And his name is Hwang Inchan. And the book itself is called You Have Reached the End of the Future. It's a collection of poems written by him as well as other authors. And we are interested in delving into it together with Andrea. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so I'm not an often reader of poetry myself, but for you, Andrea, do you often dive into poetry as a part of your literature reading experience?
Not really. I'm more into novels and short stories, and I think I have read like maybe some poems. I'm a Spanish speaker, so I read like some poems from Mario Benedetti or Pablo Neruda, Octavio Paz, that they are like Latin Americans, like Uruguay, Mexico, and other places. And actually, I think this one is my first time like reading poetry in English. So it was an interesting experience.
Right. I guess the reason why this collection of poems is even special for us is because it was translated in English. But apart from the one that we're going to be talking about today, do you often read Korean poetry or Korean poems?
Not really, but last year a friend gave me a book of Korean poetry. It was just in Korean. So it was kind of experience reading it and then using
dictionaries to look up,
like to try to understand. But I think it has like a magic, like to read poetry or any kind of literature content in the original language. So it was nice. I like it. But it was also nice to understand it,
right?
Like with the book.
Because it's right, exactly. Because the different language, you're not sure if you get the meaning or the symbols directly. One thing before I wanted to delve into before we go into the poem was the fact that like the poet of this poem collection is actually writing lyrics for idols as well, which is why I feel like this collection of poems might be a little bit more touching and more meaningful as well. But apart from that, I feel like poetry gives us a sense of emotion whenever we're reading it, which is why often when we're going to work and when we're going back home, we see on this whole metro subway, we see the poems that are written on the screen doors, which I think is a good way for people who are tired, people who are all fed up with work or their own problems, to kind of get a breeze, to get some refresh, and to take a little relax or deep breaths from their everyday busy lives.
I agree. Actually, I was surprised the first time that I saw those poems because it was like, oh, okay, so while I'm waiting for the metro, I can read something, not just looking at my phone.
Exactly.
So, and something that it was interesting is that, I mean, they are in Korean, the majority of them, but I have seen also in other languages, like Spanish and English. But I think that I saw like an article, like, I don't know, some months ago, that this project started like a lot of years ago, kind of like in 2008, and then they retake it some years ago. And then it's not just like Korean authors, but also citizens. That for me, that was interesting because it's not just about like famous people having their writings there, but also like normal people just like writing and putting their thoughts like through poetry. So
absolutely.
Nice.
Yeah, it's not just, famous poets that actually write their poems, but rather it's you have normal people talk about their lives, talk about their own stories, which is why I feel like poetry, in fact, isn't something grand. It's more so touching in your everyday lives, how conversations are work. It's more of like a short piece of literature that kind of touches us in our daily basis. So now I'd like to introduce the poem that we're going to be going over today. Again, as I mentioned, the poem title is You Have Reached the End of the Future. And it's very thin. As you can see, it's not a very thick book that we have over here, but it talks a lot about dreams, realities. It talks about images of animals. And also, not to mention, it talks a lot about the daily scenes of our everyday lives, which I think is why poem can be sometimes special. And including the one that is titled. It's a collection of poems, so we have several different poems going on as well. And the poet includes an essay and a note at the very end of the poetry, which is why I guess it makes it a little bit more special, because we can actually delve into the world of the poet himself. And today, that's why we've each chosen a poem to talk about and introduce to all of our viewers. And I guess, shall I begin?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so the poem that I chose is titled, let me get to it. It is titled Evening Bell. I'm sure our readers can't see it from far away, but it's on page 26 if any of our readers decide to get the book. And I will be reading it paragraph by paragraph. Evening Bell. Lots of people were waiting for the bell to be rung. Fireworks exploded. Shouts and cheers could be heard. Let's go somewhere, anywhere now. I was grateful for those words. Above our heads, uncountable things are falling. The bell had at some point stopped ringing. People walked past the riverbanks, past Han River, past other people who had already died. They were walking the new year. People kept walking on past the crumbled apartments, past the spindly trees lining the street. Let's go somewhere, anywhere now. Merciful, useless words. Bells echo through the air again. The new year began in the middle of the night. This is the poem that I chose.
It feels really different when you are listening to another person reading
right?
it out, because the sensation when you read it is like, okay, kind of I'm feeling what is happening, but then when you are listening to another voice, it's also if the other person is telling you the story.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's nice, like also like that sensation. But why did you choose that one?
Right. Good point, Andrea. Now that you mention it, it's different when you actually read a poem and when you hear someone read a poem. The reason why I chose this is because it actually reminded me of this year. For this year's New Year's Eve, I was at Poshingak, which is an area where normally a lot of people go for New Year's Eve, and that's where they ring the bells. So for me, it felt a little bit more personal. It felt like I was actually kind of reminiscing of the moment of this year. And also I feel like the words, the way that the author written it, he does a good job on kind of delineating it. He does a good job in really explaining that situation. And he also does a good job on how the poem can kind of be very calm, because yes, there's like fireworks, yes, there are people shouting, but the poem for me felt still very calm and very still, which is, I guess, another perk of poem and of poetry, which is why, you know, it gives a lot of deep thinking for those that are reading poems.
Yeah, giving you like tranquility and
right.
also
There we go.
reflection.
Tranquility. Yes, exactly. It gives you a sense of transit. Yes, that type of feeling is what I had normally gotten.
Yeah, I think I have like walked around like
Have
that
you?
area.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, in New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have been in that area.
But now you know.
Yeah.
For you, Andrea, now I'm going to pass over the book so you can please enlighten us with your favorite poem that you had find out during this collection of poems.
Well, like to be sincere, I like many.
As you can see with the post-its.
Yeah, I have more before, but then also when reading the essays, for me it was interesting, like some parts related like to the use of poem or poetry inside of the body of the content. So I'm going to read it then. So it's in page 39 if you want to read it later. And then it's called Chatterproof. So rain falls. When I start a poem like this, it's like I have been already finished the poem. When I start a poem by talking about poetry, it's like I've managed to write something. The way talking about love makes you feel a little more in love. But what should happen after the rain falls? Whether to talk about the rain or describe two people in the rain, the smell of dirt on rainy days, or the heavy damp sensation of wet clothes as a mood. Rain falls. Once I have written that down, I feel relief. Work going okay? When you asked, the darkness of night was approaching outside the window, And now that the outdoors have darkened, the windows reflects what's inside. There you see two people facing each other in the soft and cozy atmosphere, choosing their words carefully because there is so much to say. I should leave things at that today. I come to think, as I watch your face, we smile and stand side by side at the door. There is someone knocking on the door, someone drenched in rain, someone calling me. And well, that's it. I like it a lot. I think that you have like this idea also of somehow romance and somehow also, let's say, daily experiences. Because, I mean, this sensation of finding another person inside or just like the experience of rain, it can happen here or it can happen
Absolutely.
in
It's
any
the daily
place
lives.
of the world. And also like the description and how like the use of the words, I think it's beautiful. Also, as I said before, like when the author starts like, okay, I wrote this and this means that it finished like this, or that I already create this sensation,
Right.
and then poetry. I think that was really interesting because it was my first time like seeing a poet like talking about writing poetry inside
I'm writing
of
it,
the
right.
body. So I think that part like was like really well done, and I think I like it a lot. And it makes me think a little bit about like poetry like in my country. So I'm not really a good reader of poetry, but if you want to read, for instance, like Colombian poetry, there is Raúl Hatin or Maria Carranza, and like there is one that I remember a lot that is José Asunción Silva, that even if you go to Bogota, that is the capital, there is a house with his name. And it's because like the poets that he wrote, like kind of, I don't know, mark like a generation inside of the country.
Very impressive.
And he was just 30 when he died, but he wrote like a lot of interesting stuff, and I think that they were like really beautiful. So I think that it like, it doesn't matter in which place you are, like this kind of cultural representations through short stories, through poems,
Right.
and novels, etc. I think it's really enriched, like to have the opportunity, like to read them.
Right, exactly.
And I found that with this book.
Right. As I was just reading through the comments right now, and someone had mentioned that the texture of emotion really came through, which is why I agree when you were reading it, not only did the emotions really come through, but I agreed with the same point with you, because when you first start out, you start out with, I write this poem. That's kind of how the poem starts out with, which something that I thought interesting as well, because, you know, the poet had written this and he knows that the reader is reading it, but he explicitly mentions that, you know, I am going to be talking about this type of poem as well. And I also read through the comments that it's interesting how something so daily, so trivial, can even be a part of a poem, right? Exactly. Literature isn't something about too much. It's something about daily things. It can be even, you know, something that you, our viewers, have been experiencing as well. So not only have you given us recommendations on who to read if you're interested in Colombian poets, now we're going to be reading about the actual poem, or the actual title of the poem, thank you, which is You Have Reached the End of the Future. So Andrea and I will be sharing half and half, and I will start us off. You have reached the end of the future. At lunch, everyone's tied up. They go somewhere for a while and come back shortly. One takes a walk, another falls in the water. People keep wandering the outskirts of the park, and that is the life of moderns. I see, I understand. But this has no relation to understanding. I understand that as well.
Lovers breaking up under the middle light of afternoon, serious, sad faces they have. They are anticipating the freedom post-separation. It's not like we can go somewhere other than the park, but the walls continue. Because at lunch, everybody tied up. the person who fell in the water is walking out of the water now.
So what did you think about this poem? I mean, it's the title of the collection of poems, so the poet must have had some intuition when he was trying to put this as his main title. What did you think about it?
I think it's like first interesting like to have this experience of
Right,
reading
reading it
together,
half and half, yeah.
and like reading aloud, because I think that it's not something that usual. Like,
Right.
normally you just read it like by yourself.
By yourself, right.
But then like this experience of doing it like with a group of people or with others, I think that you are also sharing more.
Right, you get to share the emotions.
Yeah. Well, regarding the poem itself, I think it's interesting, like this idea of kind of cyclical, because when it's talking about the part, it's like, can we go out of the part or can we not go out? And also like this idea of the water, because it's mentioned like more than once. And then it's like also the description of being inside or out of the water. And also like this idea of freedom. Like what is freedom, or what is like to be like in this separation, post-separation. That idea I think was also interesting.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because it seems that the title is You Have Reached the End of the Future. And we talked about it before, how it seems very dystopian in a way, but also at the same time, when we actually read through the content, it's something so special, right? Exactly. It's like people have lunchtime, some people take a break, some people go into the water, I'm assuming, which is a metaphor for something. And it seems that even though it's so much of a daily life, depending on how you really interpret it, meanings can be different, it can be understood in different ways. And especially I felt like for me, the last sentence seems to be very up in the air. Could you read it once more, Fred?
Yes. The person who fell in the water is walking out of the water now. So I think that, as you said, can be like really metaphorical, because maybe it's like you make a mistake or something bad happen in your life and then you fall. But after maybe struggling inside of that water, you are able to go out, and then you are able like to continue with your life. So that sensation, I think, that is the one that we have like with that last sentence,
right.
which is interesting.
Which is interesting, exactly. Even for me, it felt like if I try to connect it with the title, they say you have reached the end of the future, but it is cyclical in a sense that the person comes back out again. So does that mean that, you know, the future repeats itself? Does that mean that we get to dictate our own future? It really is kind of up in the air.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go through the comments and see if anyone has actually reviewed. Well, some people have said that they've read it before. Some people say that they've maybe seen the scene before. It's interesting because it's a very powerful act of reading it through and understanding it very quietly. So I've mentioned it in the beginning that this collection of poems at the end talks about essays and notes that the author, that the poet himself kind of provides us for the readers. Was there any part that you found particularly impressive or memorable from that part as well?
Well, I think that it was really interesting not to have just the poems, but essays like from the author, and also like from some people that knew the author and was describing him, because I like one part of the comments, apart like from the essay, that it was kind of a friend from him telling like, yeah, when we went to the zoo, the kind of experience that we have, how he was describing. And later, like in the poems, it's usual to see animals. And it's usual to see like this idea of like walking around, like maybe not the zoo, but like through life.
Right.
Yeah. And then like regarding regarding the essay itself, there is one part that he's talking about like being useful, or like if literature can be useful or is useless. And I think that this idea of have a use of something is difficult when we are talking about like literature or humanities in general.
Right.
Yeah. And then I think it was interesting because I'm going to read just like a small part here. It says, through this terrific dissertation, is talking about like another essay. Jung seems to be saying an indirect farewell to the value of useless literature, a belief long held within Korean literature history. I think like later, like with the essay, this idea of it can be useful or it can be useless, I think that is a dichotomy, that it can be both. And I think like kind of the important part is, I don't know, like there is no a right answer. It can be more than one. And sometimes it can be useful even like for representing something in particular about the historical epoch that is happening, even like for resistance, even like for portraying some ideas that maybe through another kind of content is not that easy. So here maybe can be indirect, but at the same time it can be just for the sense of beauty.
Pleasure,
Yes,
joy, right, exactly.
So I think that part was really interesting.
What's interesting is I was just reading through the comments and someone asked if you were to answer, if you would like to ask the poet some kind of question, what would it be? The comment was from it's a comment that we've made, but for us and for our readers and for our viewers, maybe they can also have some thought as well. But before we listen to our readers and what they comment, if you were to ask something, would there be something that you'd like to ask after you've read the essays and the notes, and now that you've mentioned there was a specific part that you enjoyed?
I think that something that calls my attention is kind of the influences, because I'm not really into reading poetry, but I wonder, like, when a poet is writing, apart from his or her experiences in life, I think that probably they read a lot before.
I'm sure, right.
And then I wonder which influences they have. And in particular with him, like which kind of, I don't know, the top 3 books.
Right. Are there anything that really
to
inspired
recommend
him?
and that inspire him like to write in the way that he does.
Right, that's very interesting. So if any of our viewers have something to ask or to the poet, what would it be? Just leave a comment freely. And so for today, we looked at You Have Reached the End of the Future by poet Hwang Inchan, and a collection of 5 poems, as Andrea is showing. We also read over 2 of our favorite poems. I read Evening Bell, and Andrea read Shatterproof. And it was special for me because not only have I read this poem in Korean, but it was also a chance for me to read it in English, so the translated version of it. And you kind of get the feel of both the original version and the translated version as well. The poet Hwang Inchan, in an interview previously, he had talked about how poetry itself is kind of a conversation between the one who has written the poem and the one who's reading the poem, which is why it's interesting that a translation copy like this actually allows for more dialogue. It not only reaches more readers, it allows for readers with a different language to also be exposed to whatever Hwang Inchan or the poet is trying to deliver, which is why I hope that more of these Korean poems can be translated into Korean. So, people like you, Andrea, don't have to look through the dictionary and find the meaning of the poem, but they can get the direct feeling of it.
Yeah. I think that it's really interesting how nowadays we have translation in different languages, like for us to be able like to reach this content that if we don't know Korean or the original language, like we are able to still
get the emotion, right?
But now I think that it's still like reading in the original language is really nice. So I really like also these books that have the original and the translation,
both of them,
because later if you are also learning the language, like kind of see how it was translated, I think it's really nice. And I think translating poetry is really hard. I think also the translator in this book did a really good job, because really you can feel somehow what the author wanted to say through another language that is sometimes not that easy.
Very tricky,
to kind of share like the feelings, the emotions.
The symbols, some metaphors. It's sometimes really difficult to translate the original copy, which is why I guess the translator has done a really good job. And so today we've talked about You Have Reached the End by Hwang Inchan, and this is all we have for Who Reads Story today. Please like and leave a comment on our today's episode, and also subscribe to our channel. Today we had Andrea. Thank you for coming here.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for now. See you next time.
Bye.